David Ottlinger, good to see you.
Hello, Dan.
Welcome to everyone in the Sophia Meaning of Life Blogging Heads TV audience. I'm here with one of several of my regular partners in crime, David Ottlinger. Writes for the Electric Agora, of course, a fine publication. And was it former University of Georgia or is it Georgia State? I always forget.
Georgia State, University of Chicago, right. Before that.
Right, Georgia State, University of Chicago. So the man has a fine pedigree. And
yeah.
Good genes, all that. We are here to talk about guns. And obviously the most recent big event involving guns in the sense of a mass shooting is this shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. But actually, you and I have both written pieces for the Electric Agora in the past, not that long ago, in the wake of other shootings. You wrote a piece after the Las Vegas shootings, which I think was one of the largest, most spectacular in that sense. It was a guy up in a hotel with an assault rifle or several assault rifles, right, just unloading. And then I wrote one, a fictional address by President Obama on guns in 2016. I think yours was in 2017, I want to say. Or 2015. I'm not sure. Whenever the Las Vegas shooting was.
November 2017.
2017. And I don't even remember which shooting mine was written after. I mean, there was, it's at the point now where I have trouble remembering which school, which mass shooting we're talking about.
It was after Orlando.
Orlando, okay.
But that is the thing.
So yeah, please. Why are we doing this, David?
Yeah. So you wrote. I wrote like a piece one major shooting ago, and you wrote one couple major shootings ago because that's how we reckon time now.
Right.
And
every year, yeah. What year is it? Oh, it's the third year after the shooting in Orlando, right?
Right. And it's just become so depressingly monotonous, and the conversation is after each of these shootings has become so repetitious. And it seems to have become so stagnant that after this most recent one, the Pittsburgh one, I haven't really noticed a gun conversation kicking up much at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know what? You're right. This one, you didn't have the usual NRA people coming out. Well, I guess you did have Trump say, well, if there'd only been somebody with a gun inside. But you didn't really have the big sort of news cycle of NRA types coming out and saying, arm everybody, and then the other side coming out and saying, well, if we just had more gun control, this wouldn't have happened. So you're right. You think it's exhaustion?
I think it's exhaustion, and I think it's that the arguments on both sides are very bad, and they don't come in contact with each other very well.
Yeah, they're just yelling, at each other.
And they don't get down to the core issues. So you and I agree about what the most important arguments are, and that they're very different from the ones people generally hear.
Yeah. I don't even – I want to be careful. I don't even know if I think that they're the most important. Let me just sort of tell you how I think about this, and you can tell me what you think. Look, it seems to me the most important question is the empirical one, and that is what will actually reduce mass shootings, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, I am not equipped to answer that question, and apparently nobody is, because we don't know because otherwise we'd have the answer, right? I mean, this is a matter of dispute, and it's probably a very difficult question just because of all the variables that have to be disambiguated in trying to understand the problem. What I'm interested in is the philosophical question of what role in general guns have to play in a traditionally liberal society like ours, that is one designed on the basis of Enlightenment social contract principles. And so, in other words, I really don't want to be adding a voice to if you had just done this, this wouldn't have happened, because I have no confidence that that's true at all. Right? I just simply want to say, okay, given that guns now are clearly an important issue, it's worth asking, what role should guns play in a society like ours, given the type of society we are, rather than suggest that I'm offering something that's going to solve the problem, which I just don't think is the case. How do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, I think that is kind of the most fundamental issue. And yes, I agree we'll shy away from the empirical questions and leave them for another day.
Well, and to social scientists, I mean, to people that actually have the data. I mean, we don't.
And that's a complicated and worthy aspect of this kind of larger issue, which we won't be dealing with. But yes, we should focus on the philosophical side. But I do think that if it's the case that the empirical evidence supports the idea that restricting access to guns is ameliorative, or well, I guess everything's ameliorative because nothing's ever totally solved in policy. But if it's seriously ameliorative, and if we're right about how to deal with the philosophical issues, you cannot help but realize that ends up becoming a really strong and I think kind of ineluctable justification for restricting access to guns.
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, I guess on these sorts of questions having to do with sort of public well-being, right, I do envisage the possibility of there being a tension between what people have a right to, given our system, and what empirically is going to reduce mass shootings. And obviously those things have to be balanced. I won't deny that emotionally, sort of, I have to say that, you know, if it turns out that X is what's required to stop these things from happening, and, you know, X is incompatible with some right somebody has, and maybe the right needs to be revisited. But I also recognize the danger of thinking that way. I mean, if you changed it from guns to something else, it might not be so obvious that that's the way that's the way we should think about it. So I agree. I agree with you. We shouldn't deny the importance of the philosophical question. I just want to make it clear that I at least am not intending to participate in the kind of thing that we just said we hate, and that is each side yelling about what it thinks would fix the problem, because I don't know it'll fix the problem.
Okay.
So, so how do you want to do this? Do you want to just talk about the liberal social contract, the social contract and liberalism, and what we think it has to say about guns, or did you want to start with the articles? I know you have a really ripe quote from Grover Norquist. How do you want to get into this?
We'll get around to Grover Norquist, but looking at your article, which you wrote, which is an imaginary address from then President Barack Obama, in which, quite uncharacteristically, he gives us a much-needed civics lesson. That's your phrase, a much-needed civics lesson.
Yeah.
That just involves the relation between the social contract and guns. So you identify two basic commitments, which you identified, I think, rightly as being particularly salient. Shall I read them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good. Okay. So the idea is, first of all, and maybe you want to take the ball on this, American government and even American civic culture is, what should we say, founded on, maybe that's too strong, but is always featured as a core element, this kind of social contract thinking.
I would argue that the United States is one of the products of the social contract thinking of the Enlightenment. I would say France is another. France, however, coming out of Rousseau rather than Locke, and so taking a very different course. Of course, Locke is not the only influence on the American founding. You also, of course, have Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws. And you also, of course, have a significant influence from the ancient Roman Republic. But I would argue that in terms of the sort of the logic of our system of government and the founding documents, especially the Declaration of Independence, all really resonate with Lockean ideas. It's not a secret. I mean, I'm teaching this right now in school at the university. And, the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that's in the Declaration of Independence, that's everyone's natural right. And Locke is life, liberty, and property. And if you understand the role of property, you'll understand that they're basically the same. I mean, that the statements are basic, that those basic rights are essentially the same. So I do think that it's not too strong or inaccurate to say that the United States is a country, is a fundamentally liberal society based upon social contract thinking from the Lockean tradition. I would argue that, yes.
Right. And fortunately, we've already done a dialogue about liberalism, and we talked about...
We did 2 dialogues on liberalism, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Although there we talked a lot about Mill and other people, too. We wasn't strictly social contract, but right. Yes, we did talk about it.
We did talk about Locke a lot.
Yes, we did.
And so if people want to go view that, that would be great. But more taking a narrower focus today, you identified 2 basic commitments, which are kind of at the core of social contract theory. So social contract theory it's a theory about what makes governments legitimate. And the legitimacy flows from this kind of contract that we all implicitly or explicitly bind ourselves to. And there are 2 aspects that, again, you identified. One is that the social contract consists of a collective agreement on everyone's part to surrender their right to enforce the law of nature and transfer it to a third party, the government, granting it the authority to do so. So we don't want to talk too much about the law of nature, but the idea is that prior to forming a social contract, we all have the right to judge in our own cases and to protect ourselves and to exercise whatever means are necessary to protect ourselves. But when we form the social contract, we make a collective agreement and we surrender those rights.
We surrender some of them. Yeah, I mean, right. and this is part of the thing where people are going to maybe push back and say, well, we don't surrender those, right? Right. But I mean, look, you have to talk about the natural law to at least for a second, because otherwise the whole thing doesn't make sense. I mean, the idea sort of is that as a matter of nature, naturally, that is independently of any social or political authorities, we are all naturally free and equal. Mm-hmm. And we're all fundamentally individuals, right? Mm-hmm. So this was a break with the pre-modern tradition where the individual was the social unit was prior to the individual, and that the individual was defined in terms of it, and in which political authority was thought to be exist naturally. The state was thought to have it naturally, and for Locke, for the modern theorists, it's the opposite. It's that no, the individual is fundamental. The only natural authority rests in the individual, and that as a result, any public authority that exists has to, in some sense, derive its authority from the natural authority of the individual. And that basically is what happens when we make agreements, right? I mean, I might agree to work for you in return for money, and therefore you acquire certain authority over me because I've granted it to you, and it's to our mutual benefit for in this particular sphere for you to be the boss and for me to be the employee. And I also only have as much authority over you as you give me. Right, and I can break the deal. I mean, the minute I stop working for you, you have no authority over me anymore. Right? Because the contract is dissolved. Right, that's right. And so now, in the state of nature, because the only authority that exists is the natural authority of the individual, and because everyone is naturally free and equal and therefore has a natural right not to be harmed by others and a natural obligation not to harm other people, enforcement of the law of nature, the only authority to enforce is that of the individual, and he only has the right to enforce in his own case, right? So I have the right, when somebody harms me, I have in the state of nature, I have the natural right to punish him, and and take recompense and whatever, depending on what he's done to me, and vice versa, right? Locke thinks that this is obviously not ideal. And the reason it's not ideal is because justice is constrained. It's constrained by principles like the principle of proportionality. It's constrained by all sorts of principles that only are possible to adhere to if one is dispassionate. Mm-hmm. And the one case that you are least likely to be dispassionate in is your own, right? And so Locke says it's simply not ideal that the individual be the policeman, the judge, and the executioner in his or her own case, because in his or her own case, he is the person least likely to be dispassionate and therefore least likely to be just in his response to any violation of his natural rights, right? Which makes the point that it's not a free-for-all in the state of nature. No, right? It's not a Hobbesian state of nature. Right. Locke believes there are natural rights and natural laws, and he thinks that they follow from our natural equality and our natural freedom. Right. So, and that's really enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that's made very clear that we are naturally free and naturally equal. And what that means is that you don't have the right to just do anything to anyone, right? Even in the state of nature. The problem in the state of nature is that enforcement falls to the individual. And the individual is the worst person to enforce the law in his or her own case. Look, in civil society, we require judges to be dispassionate. If a judge has any relationship or investment with the people involved, the litigants in the case, he or she must recuse themselves, right? Right. And that's because we recognize that in the human temperament, partiality renders dispassion impossible, and therefore justice will not be done. So you're much more likely to over punish the person, right? If someone, let's put it this way. A policeman is much less likely to shoot a burglar than I am when the burglar's in my house. Right? Because I feel the passions of the protection of my own life, my daughter's life, my wife's life. The policeman hopefully doesn't, all right? And understands, okay, the guy broke into the house and, stole a toaster. Right. The proper penalty for that is not death, right? But for me as an individual, I'm stricken by fear and loathing and all these sorts of things, and I am much less likely in the heat of those emotions to react that way. So that's why Locke says it's that one of the fundamental rationales for making the social contract, and we'll have to talk about what that consists of because that gets to the guns issue. One of the major rationales for making the social contract is that it is a bad idea to have people enforce the law themselves in their own cases. Right. I'm sorry, I went on a long time. You should comment to whatever degree you want. That's all helpful. So then you've laid out the problems with the law of nature or with the state of nature very well. And the proposed solution is to transfer these rights of dealing with injustice and dealing with crime to a third party, which becomes the government. Right. And it's the government,
in view of the fact that these rights are transferred to it. That's just kind of what it means to be the government.
Right. I mean, look, I try to tell my students over and over again, because I think people they don't understand this, and I think it affects the way we interact with the public authorities. The policeman does not have authority over you because he has a weapon.
Right.
The policeman has authority over you because you granted him the right to be the one to do this job, to play this role, right? To be the person who goes chases after burglars and arsonists and shoplifters and all this sort of stuff, right? He has no authority otherwise, other than his own natural authority that everyone has over him or herself, right? And we do that.
In which case he's not a police officer.
Yeah, I'm sorry?
In which case he's not a police officer.
Exactly. And so, and he the question is, where does political authority come from? And the answer is, it comes from every individual agreeing to transfer part of their natural authority to these third parties, right? For the purpose of executing justice in a more just fashion than we would as individuals, right?
Right.
And we all make this agreement because we don't trust each other.
Right.
Right. And that's what always fascinates me about the gun debate, is that, the whole premise of the social contract is that I don't trust you to control yourself enough to live with you in a kind of a Wild West scenario. And so we all kind of agree, okay, we're going to see those people over there. We're going to give them special hats, and they're going to roam around, and they're going to be the ones that now, if that's my basic rationale for forming the government, forming the state, why the hell would I then want you walking around Walmart with a pistol?
Right. Well, we'll get.
But that's where it's pointing is the point.
Right. But that gets to our second basic commitment. Which when you were talking about your kids, your students, talking to police officers. The second part is we make a collective agreement that each of us will voluntarily submit to the authority of the third party, which is to say, if a cop comes up to you and asks you a question, you are supposed to say, yes, officer, no, officer, and you're supposed to, you can resist them in certain ways. You could say, am I being detained? Am I under arrest? But you're supposed to, so long as they're exercising their authority correctly, it's part of the agreement that we go along with that, and we both, the police and the civilian, follow proper procedures and proper rules and do what is necessary to make that exercise of power happen smoothly.
Yeah. Look, it depends upon, for it to work, for the social contract approach to this to work, there has to be overwhelming voluntary compliance, because you just simply are never going to have sufficient, even though the state in the social contract theory has a monopoly on force, as the argument obviously implies, right? It's never going to have sufficient force to overwhelm, the entire citizenry. And so it really does depend on us. And for the most part, we really do overwhelmingly voluntarily submit to the authority. I will just say one thing about this, which sort of does disturb me a little bit, and this is why I keep emphasizing this to students, is I do think that this gets kind of blurred in people's minds, and they start to think that the policeman's authority does come from the fact that he's got a weapon and that he can beat the shit out of you and throw you in a car and lock you up. And I even see that a little bit in the directions in which deferentiality go. In other words, agree that the agreement, the tacit agreement the social contract imagines, does require us to be respectful of and deferential to, in a certain way, the police. But the way you look at the way these interactions go, it seems to me that we're deferential to a point that seems to me to indicate confusion over where the actual authority lies. I think it's the policeman that should be calling you sir, not you calling him sir, because the policeman doesn't actually have any authority. He only has authority insofar as you've granted it to him. And I feel like we're getting into a relationship with law enforcement that's more and more blurring the lines between law enforcement and military. And in the case of military, there is no authority. It is pure force. right? It is simply the application of force, right? Military is not law enforcement, and we have a long tradition in this country that we should not use the military domestic, law enforcement capacity. And I just feel like all that's getting blurred, and that we're forgetting that the authority the police have is really only a matter of agreements, right? I mean, it's not anything special about them, right?
Yeah, and when a government, well, let me be careful. When a state starts to operate that way, it's not clear that it's a government anymore in quite the same way. That's when, or if you look at someplace like Mexico or Afghanistan or something, where they, by and large, don't have the compliance and the tacit agreement of the citizens, and they do just operate by pure force. We tend to call those places failed states. Yeah. And it's a completely different kind of social arrangement.
Yeah, and Locke emphasizes, in the description of the social contract, which you gave me the two key bullet points to, I would add a third, and that is that the people who occupy the positions of authority in the state themselves have to be subject to the law, right? In other words, the actual individuals are simply role fillers, right? And are no less subject to the law themselves. That's why, as I said to students, that's why it is so dangerous in a society like ours in particular when public authorities abuse it. Mm-hmm. And from Nixon on, right? I'm not saying they never did before, but I mean, there's a certain consciousness in the nation from Nixon on of this kind of violation of the duty of the public official to the law. It's so dangerous precisely because it undermines the fundamental rationale for the social contract.
Right.
And Locke's view actually returns you to the state of nature. And I would actually argue that right now, if you were to speak, strictly speaking, philosophically, that we are only partly an intact social contract.
I definitely want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But so this is Juvenal's famous problem of who watches the watchman. The police are by definition above the law in one sense because they
have the monopoly on force.
They have the monopoly on force. They don't follow all the traffic laws. They don't follow all the carry laws. They don't follow all the laws on being able to touch people or wrestle them to the ground and assault. And that's what makes them police officers, is they're given these special privileges that they're able to execute things. But they're only police officers, real police officers, when they use those special privileges towards the certain purposes, which lead us to create police departments in the first place. They're only supposed to physically tackle the people who are breaking the law. They're only supposed to...
and only under certain circumstances, right? I mean,
right.
In other words, that's the last thing you're supposed to do, right? Mm-hmm. The use of... I mean, look, the English police, up until not very long ago, did not even carry firearms. Mm-hmm. I think that... Look, I think that demonstrably it can work, because it has, right? Mm-hmm. To the extent to which it's starting to not work or unravel, I think we need to ask the question why. But it's not because it couldn't work, right? It has. I can remember going to London, a major city, mm-hmm. and the policemen were not carrying firearms. That to me, that sort of is the ultimate, right? That's how it should be working, right? Mm-hmm. They shouldn't need them, and you shouldn't, and they shouldn't need them because you shouldn't be fighting them, right? Right. And I'm under the impression that, as an empirical matter, it's largely the drug war that changed this, right? That the nature of the violent criminality begin to involve firearms to a point to which police had no choice, and that the drug gangs, the agents of these organizations, had such a spectacular disregard for the social contract, so to speak. police had to militarize. Yeah.
That's also how Americans destroyed Mexico. But that's another story for them.
Yeah. No. But it's important. Yeah.
But that gets us right into guns, right? So your basic point, which you made just a few minutes ago, was if I don't trust you well enough to judge in your own case, and you even put it that you don't trust yourself to judge in your own case.
We shouldn't, right?
So if we don't trust each other or even trust ourselves enough, to such an extent that we transfer authority to some third party, which we then call the government, why would we leave guns lying around, since that guns provide sufficient means to challenge the government? And I think that's the very basic point. If we transfer authority to a third party, but then leave lying everywhere sufficient means to challenge, for an individual citizen to challenge that authority, in what sense have we really made the transfer to a third party?
Yeah, I think that private citizens walking around with pistols, and I would really distinguish carrying out in public from keeping, let's say, a shotgun in your house. I mean, although we can even talk about that, right? But, I'm not a purist. I'm happy to just talk about people. I'm just happy to talk about the guy in Starbucks with a pistol.
Right. Or for me, because I live in Ohio, I saw a guy with a Hillary for Prison T-shirt and a "Don't Tread on Me" belt, carrying 2 pistols in the grocery store.
2 pistols.
2 pistols.
It's that second one. You got to have that one. On both sides, like a cowboy.
I think it was one on one side and one in the back.
Jesus. In Ohio.
In Cincinnati, in the real city.
Don't tread on me. Isn't that New Hampshire?
Yeah, well, he didn't mind.
You should have told him. I think you should go to New Hampshire as soon as possible. So you should have said to him. I'm happy to just talk about sort of carrying about. I mean, it seems to me that people walking around, private citizens walking around with pistols,
right,
is almost like a performance art version of saying, I don't accept the social, I'm not willing to make the social contract.
Yes. It's saying wherever I go, whatever happens to me, I'm going to judge in my own case. I'm not going to need.
What do you have it for, right?
Right. Which is very different, as you pointed out, from having it in your home. That's only saying if somebody breaks into my home in the middle of the night where they're not supposed to be in the first place.
Yeah.
Then I'll be ready to judge in my own case, which it's at least is more.
Right. I still think, though, that within the home, you still have the base argument, which is the proportionality argument. That is that, look, if a guy breaks into your house to steal your coffee maker, the appropriate punishment is not a death sentence.
Right.
And the problem is that you as an individual homeowner where your kids are in there and stuff, you're not going to make those distinctions, right? You're going to just kill the guy. And according to Locke, you've in a sense not only have you broken the social contract, I mean, you've in a sense returned yourself to the state of nature. You've now harmed, you've now wronged, you've violated his natural rights now. Because the principle of proportionality operates in the state of nature, right? In the state of nature, if you steal a chicken from me, I can't go kill your whole family. Then I've harmed you. I haven't administered justice. I've harmed you. And now you have the right to seek justice against me. And so I'm even worried about the guns in the home. But like I said, I'm not a purist, and I'm willing to sort of accept that even though the argument applies, there are certain practicalities that have to be sort of taken into account. But certainly carrying around in the street strikes me as just fundamentally inconsistent with the basic logic of the social contract in the most obvious way, that I'm really surprised that this is not more often a topic of conversation. You just don't hear this at all. I mean, when I published that essay, I don't think that was a part of any public conversation about these shootings and about what people, So anyway, yeah. So
it's debatable even in the home case.
I think so.
But it's really I'll quote you directly here because this is a good phrase, but you said to allow private citizens to carry weapons undermines the very logic on which our civil society rests. And just to briefly reiterate what that means, what you're doing fundamentally is failing to transfer that authority to enact the laws to the government, to the third party that we all trust to administer justice.
Right, and failing to recognize that the reason why we do that is because we don't trust each other and we don't trust ourselves. And so the person walking around with a pistol either does trust himself and does trust others, which Locke would argue he has no reasonable reason to, or he doesn't care, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, he doesn't care about justice, right? Mm-hmm. And in that case, then it strikes me he has put himself in the state of nature. You have enough people do that, then there's a question whether you really have a social contract at all. Right. I mean, there's obviously a lot of objections, and I think in our correspondence, you identified a number of objections. I don't know if you want to go to them now or whether there's some further things you want to develop along these lines.
Yeah, no, I do want to. So we just made the fundamental case that the case for restricting firearms kind of flows directly from social contractarian thinking. And so if we accept that that's the form of government we have, then we have a pretty strong case for restricting those things. But of course, there are some objections to that kind of thinking lying around, and we want to talk about why we don't think they're any good.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me just ask you about the questions, about the objections as a whole. Mm-hmm. Do you see them mostly as objections that are basically saying, no, the social contract really is consistent with people walking around Walmart and Starbucks with weapons, or that, well, that social contract logic's kind of fucked up. I mean, that it's a bad idea. We shouldn't think of society. I mean, look, not all the liberals were social contract theorists. I mean, Hume famously was not a social contract theorist.
Right.
And I don't think Burke properly could be seen as a social contract theorist, although that gets a little more debatable. But Hume explicitly isn't one.
Right.
And so, do you see most of the objections that people typically voice? And again, this argument really doesn't get made this way very much, but to the extent to which people make the case that they should be allowed to walk around Starbucks and Walmart with a pistol, do you think that mostly the case they're making is that it's consistent with social contractarian thinking, or that it's not, but so much the worse for social contractarian thinking?
If I had to guess, I would say the conservative intellectuals are generally making the case that it's consistent with social contract theory, especially it gets into right to revolution, which gets into Locke.
That's because most of the conservatives in America are actually liberals. They're not really right. In other words, a real conservative.
Right.
A real conservative would be anti-social contract because just simply because of the radical individualism of it, right?
Right.
That's part of my reason, by the way. This is just tangent. I don't actually think there's any real I don't think there's actually any real conservative movement in the United States. I just think there's varieties of liberalism, and then you have progressives, of course. I actually don't think that there's anything akin to an old school British Tory in the United States, because we are all social contractarians at a certain level. In other words, I agree with you, but I do think that the conservative intellectuals, almost all of them, are going to argue that it's consistent with social contract thinking. And that's because they are all actually liberals. They're not really conservatives. And so they don't reject the basic principles of liberalism, of political liberalism. It seems to me. You think there is actually a real anti-individualist conservative tradition in the United States?
I would say, you said most conservatives are liberals.
Yes, small L liberals.
I would say most conservatives are liberals some of the time. I love
That's fair enough. I mean,
Brink Lindsay, who heads the Niskanen Center, was on Blogging Heads.
Yeah, he's the libertarian, as they call them, right? I always liked him. Yep.
Yeah, I like him too. I wish he saw the Tarian off the end and just.
I wish he'd come back on Blogging Heads. He used to be on Blogging Heads quite a lot.
Well, he had a good line, which he said that the conservative movement was always this combination of kind of more conservative, traditional conservative tendencies and sort of liberal, libertarian tendencies. And he called it a chimera, which I thought was a wonderful line.
Yeah.
Because a chimera, for people who don't know mythology, is part lion, part goat, and
it's a hybrid animal.
Part dragon, I think. But it's like three different animals put together. And I think what was really revealing about that comment is if you tried to really put an animal together that way, it probably couldn't breathe. Like the parts wouldn't go together. It's
not a viable animal.
Right, exactly.
And so you're saying, and so these conservatives are not really viable political positions, in a sense. I mean, look, I notice I didn't say that there's nobody on the right who's not a liberal. I do think there are reactionaries. But if by a conservative you mean something like what T.S. Eliot describes in his political writings, which I think is about the best 20th century expression of true conservatism, I just don't think you have that tradition in the United States, and that's because of its individualism. The individualism is just simply at odds with the most fundamental conservative principles. Not just to mention, not just the individualism, but also the lack of belief in fundamental natural hierarchies. Aristocracy. And so I don't think that those are separable from conservatism. I'm going to link to this also. I actually published a pretty substantial piece also on conservatism. Right. And why I don't think there is any real conservative. I mean, you'd have to go back to someone like Fisher Ames, find somebody in the American tradition that I might even be willing to sort of admit is somewhat of a conservative in the traditional meaning of the word. But even Fisher Ames, I think, is fundamentally a liberal in terms of his fundamental notion of the true, where authority fundamentally rests, right, in individuals, not in institutions.
Well, I think in mainstream conservatives, like definitely in a Ted Cruz, definitely in a Bill O'Reilly, in addition to the individualism and the sort of classical liberal elements, is this incongruous kind of communitarian element where they are very concerned. You know, Bill O'Reilly partly got famous for picking these pop culture battles. You know, they don't like. Oh yeah,
that's right. The War on Christmas.
Or
he obviously never lived in Springfield, Missouri. No. Because you can't fucking escape Christmas here from about Halloween all the way up through February, right?
Yes, it's not Christmas. Thought that was
preposterous, but yeah.
It's not Christmas until Santa goes by in the Thanksgiving Day parade. Okay, then it's Christmas. All right, but no, not just that. Not just the War on Christmas, but also the vulgarity in music, violence on television. Violence in movies, video games have been a flashpoint for many, many years. All these, they do want this kind of monoculture, or at least a sort of constrained, restricted culture. I said this in a previous dialogue, but Mike Huckabee's vision of guns, grits, God, and what was the fourth G? Guns, grits, God. Well, anyway, you see what I mean. They want that kind of shared cultural assumptions, which is more communitarian and not at all liberal.
Yeah, but don't you think that that in a sense manifests itself in a way that's fundamentally reactionary and not conservative? Because it kind of it fictionalizes the past, right? I mean, I mean, Eliot is very explicit that conservatism does not preclude change.
Right.
It simply means that change should be organic rather than theoretical, the result of theoretical considerations. And that sort of goes all the way back to Burke. And now, I mean, Burke, right. I also think was more, in some ways, a liberal rather than a conservative. And he's sort of a complicated case. But in this sense, I think he's definitely conservative. And it's why, people in blogging have been asking me to do something on conservatism with a real conservative. And that's why all the names I keep thinking of are all people from overseas, because I can't think of any actual American conservatives. All I can think of are liberals that have this kind of schizoid attitude that you describe,
or
and then reactionaries like Patrick Buchanan and stuff. And, you're not going to really learn anything about conservatism from those people, it seems to me. But I was going to try and get Roger Scruton, but I'm not sure that he would be willing to do it. So
that would be interesting.
Yeah.
But, well, you used the word schizoid, which I take to be a kind of, you're thinking in a way similar to my chimerical.
Yeah.
It's these incongruous elements put together.
Yeah.
But to answer,
I think the same thing, by the way, on the left, before people get upset, I think the same thing is true on the left. I think progressivism has really kind of polluted liberalism in a way. I mean, we shouldn't get off on this, but I want to be fair-minded about this, and this isn't like some hatchet job on the right. If anybody who's familiar with my public writings knows that I'm much more often critical of progressives than I am of conservatives right now, and that's because I view it as cleaning, keeping my own house clean. It's not because I hate people on the left more than people on the right. It's because I am on the left, so to speak. And it's important to me to not allow a tradition that I think is noble and has given us the best sort of systems that we have to be polluted by a philosophy that if you look at its history, goes back to prohibition and eugenics and all sorts of things that, if people actually knew what progressive means, might not be so eager to call themselves, right? So anyway, I'm sorry. I got us off.
No, that's all right. To answer the question you asked me, are those more communitarian elements of conservatism more reactionary than conservative? Basically, no. More no than yes. I think any kind of traditional handing down of the past will involve a degree of mythologizing the past. And I don't even think that mythologizing the past is always unhealthy.
I would probably agree with that, yeah.
Gordon Wood has done a lot of thinking about this in recent years and pushing back on people like Jill Lepore and Pauline Maier.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, yeah.
And I think there are certainly strong reactionary elements in the right, especially some parts of the right, but some part of it is still a strong part.
Is this sort of uneasy but honest combination of liberalism and communitarianism?
In its best form, sure.
It's like someone like McIntyre or from the right and someone like Sandel from the left, sort of.
Yes, I was just thinking of Sandel as well, who's also trying to make a kind of combination of these things. But just like a Matt Lewis, unless not.
You think Matt Lewis is a combined liberal communitarian, and it's the communitarianism that makes him look conservative?
Yes.
That's interesting.
And
I wish you could talk to him about that. I think it would be really interesting. I'm not sure he'd do it. I mean, but just because we're not very important.
But we keep plugging along.
He wants his star to rise in a way that we're not consistent with talking to us. But you think that he's one of these people?
Yeah,
I get a weird mixture of liberal and conservative views out of him.
Yeah, and I think that's not atypical for your average center right, either citizen or intellectual. Your average sort of talking head going on TV, who's a center right sort of person.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So back to the guns. This whole thing was a tangent that went off of me asking you whether, as a whole, you see the objections to the kind of argument we've made. Let's call it the social contractarian argument against private gun carrying. Let's call it that, okay?
Okay.
I asked you whether as a whole you view the objections to that as primarily coming from an orientation that says, no, private people carrying guns is consistent with the social contract. You're just wrong about that. Or is it that they reject the social contract and you think it's mostly the former?
Actually, what I was going to say is I think the intellectuals and the upper crust people are more making it consistent with social, or trying to make it consistent with social contract. And I think my friend in the supermarket carrying the pistols
is probably the second one.
He probably just wants to live in the state of nature. He wants to live in a Mad Max movie, or at least thinks he does.
Do you get the impression? I get the impression that these people are typically the people who actually do not live in high crime areas, and actually are not. And because I used to work in the South Bronx in the early 90s.
Right.
And not only did it never occur to me that I'd want to be walking around carrying a pistol so that I could get into a gunfight with a bunch of crack dealers. Mm-hmm. I never ever heard anybody who lived in those environments saying they wanted to walk around with a weapon. Mm-hmm. It always seems to me that the people who think they want to live in the state of nature, the people who actually have the least contact with anything remotely like the state of nature, right? Let's put it this way: Springfield, Missouri, it ain't the fucking state of nature, right? By any measure, and not even like the South Bronx or anywhere even close. And I don't know. There just seems to me a lot of. I know this is going to get me a lot of grief, but I don't know. This seems to me to be almost expressions of adolescent machismo. Oh, sure. I don't even know that I even buy their arguments about safety. I mean, I really think that they just never outgrew their 16-year-old Soldier of Fortune magazine fucking identity, right? Yeah. Well, I was told as a younger person, this would have been about 10 years ago, by a conservative economist, that the best predictor of whether you were a liberal or conservative was the average distance between people where you lived. Now that's really interesting. So that may be out of date because it was 10 years ago, but probably not. But yeah, in more rural areas where there are fewer people, people tend to be more tolerant of guns because you don't get quite the same problems. There's still a lot of problems with guns out there in rural America. Rural America is not a Mark Twain novel. There's a lot of guns. There's a lot of meth. Actually, increasingly, the really poor rural areas are starting to sort of really resemble the poor urban areas in terms of the social problems that they have, social economic problems that they have, the social disintegration. But interestingly, I think you're right about that. So anyway, do you want to go through some of what you take to be the better objections to the social contractarian argument against private people walking around in public with guns and or at some point get the Grover Norquist stuff into it? Yeah. Well, let's go through them quickly. One we have to deal with because it's just ubiquitous. And it's the one you dealt with in your piece, which is just making the perfect the enemy of the good, or they'll get guns anyway. So what's the problem, or why bother passing a law against guns? The bad guys will get guns anyway. So you want to knock that down? Well, but is it even just that? I mean, because in that sense, that's not really reply. I mean, look, yes, of course, the bad guys are going to get guns anyway, but how does that challenge the idea that the proper people to deal with the bad guys are the police and not you? I thought that the argument was, the stronger argument was, well, what if the police don't come in time? Right. Or what if there's no police around, or I have no way to contact one, or whatever? I thought that was the more potent argument, because the first argument doesn't seem to be an argument.
It's a terrible argument, but it is. You asked me, do people really make that argument? Absolutely. I think it's the most commonly made one.
I guess my answer to that is I don't see how it's an argument against the idea that the proper people to deal with those guys who get the guns anyway are the police and the courts.
Right. And that has played out.
Not you, right?
Right. And that has played out in real time that in some of these shootings, like one of the ones in Dallas a few years ago, one of the major problems for the police was Good Samaritans going out with guns, trying to help and getting in the way because the police don't know if they're shooters, or what's going on.
Wasn't Zimmerman a neighborhood watch guy?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. Neighborhood watch scares the crap out of me. I mean, we have a sign in my neighborhood that says neighborhood watch, and the only reason it doesn't make me nauseous is because my neighborhood is so small. I know everybody in it, and I know that none of them is going to run out and shoot somebody. I mean, but I just,
yeah,
I just don't trust people. At least a policeman, I have some sense. Okay, he's been through the academy, he's been through training, he knows how to use the thing. It's been drilled into his head 1,000 times when not to use it and what the rights of the person are and all that. I mean, some jerk down the street.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't trust him to fucking sweep my steps, let alone enforce the law in my neighborhood. And so I don't see how that's an argument. Why is that? Why is the fact that somebody might get a gun who's bad mean that you should be the one that goes and arrests him?
You just say sweep your steps?
Yeah.
This sepia tone 1920s stoop that you have?
I have nice brick steps in the front of my house, and right now, because it's autumn, it's covered with leaves, right?
Okay. It's so funny. Yeah, no, okay, to get to
I don't see why it's an argument, though.
So here's the thing. Because to use political science language, there's kind of a type 1, type 2 error thing going on here. Whenever there's a shooting, like you quoted Trump using this kind of logic, if only the guy at the Pittsburgh synagogue had a gun, he could have stopped this shooting, right? And people always use that language.
Good guy with a gun, bad guy with a gun, that sort of thing, yeah.
Right. As though you could stop time in the middle of a shooting with full information of everything that's going on, take a gun, put it in the hands of someone who knows how to use it, and then sort of point them at the threat and, fix it that way. But that's not how public policy works. You can't stop time and distribute guns exactly to all the good people. What you basically have is like a big storm drain or something, which is just a big pipe, right? That's just spouting out guns. and you can kind of...
every jerk and his brother can go pick up and...
Right. And you
how competent they are with them, or intelligent they are, or moral they are, is not even considered, right?
Yeah, and you can try to close the valve a little more, or you can try to open the valve a little more, but they're going to get out, and they're going to move around, and you're not going to be able to put them in exactly the hands of the people you want to.
But even if you could,
right?
I don't see how the fact that bad guys are going to get guns anyway is a reason for thinking that you should be the one to go after them and not the police. That's what I don't understand.
Well, part of this is everybody thinks they're Rambo. And nobody believes that that there's just a certain amount of risk that you can't take out of life.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks if I'm super careful, if I keep my guns in a safe, if I'm, always, have the barrel down or whatever, if I take those precautions, then there's no risk. But that's not how life works.
Right. Then my kid's not going to shoot his friend by mistake. I'm not going to shoot somebody by mistake. I'm not going to shoot somebody when I really shouldn't because I'm aflame with passion, and all that. All right, so that's one argument. And what you want is the safety one next?
Yeah, well, if you'd like, I can just do three really quickly because
Sure.
I think they really have a lot in common. And I think these are the three that you really hear from pretty much all conservative intellectuals. And I'm not talking about philosophers and jurists and people only you and I and 6 other people listen to, but the people who are on TV and write for newspapers and who are driving most of the kind of policy debate. I think these are really the arguments you hear, which is citizens will face some kind of threat beyond the reach of law enforcement. I can call the cops, but the guy is in my house now, pointing a gun at me.
By the time the police come, then I've already been robbed or beaten up or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Individual citizens will face rogue or corrupt police officers. A cop will...
Which we've actually conceded in our earlier discussion is that we are both concerned about the extent to which we think police are not staying within the role that they've been assigned within the social contract. So yes, that's another one. Yeah.
And the third one, which is really the second one out multiplied to the level of the entire society, which is we may, the citizenry in general, may face a corrupt or out of control police department, which again is not a totally abstract fear, given that you have the commander of detectives in Chicago facing serious crimes for, torturing people over a career. That shows that.
Or Waco, or any number of examples, which is, one of the reasons why I said early on that why it is so incredibly dangerous in a society like ours, and why we must be absolutely vigilant and unforgiving about that kind of state overreach, because it breaks the basic faith and confidence in the social contract, right? It does it more than anything else. And so, in other words, every time a Waco happens, every time law enforcement acts this way, it fuels the arguments for people to walk around with pistols. Basically saying, okay, well, if the government's going to act like that, then, they're not, I don't even know that I trust them to protect me. Right.
Right. It reduces their legitimacy, and it reduces the ability to which the citizenry and the government can cooperate in this way, which we said was essential to the government being an actual legitimate government.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So none of these fears are without merit, but the common logic they all have is, somebody will face crime and the cops are too far away. The only way to deal with that is with a gun. Therefore, citizens must be allowed to have guns. Citizens will face rogue or corrupt police officer. The only way to deal with that is with a gun. Therefore, citizens must be able to have guns. Or the citizenry will face a completely root to branch rogue or corrupt police force, and the citizenry must be able to face that threat. Therefore, the citizenry must be armed with guns. So it's basically the same brief argument in sort of 3 slightly different situations.
It seems to me that there's the flaw between them all is common, and that is precisely what you just said, making the perfect the enemy of the good, to a certain degree, right?
Right.
Look, let's just take the first one, and that's the people are going to find themselves in circumstances where, you say, well, the police aren't going to make it there in time, and so the only choice is for me to defend myself with a gun. And to which my answer is, well, that's really not the only choice.
Right.
So let me just...
What is the other choice?
Let me speak entirely personally.
Right.
I've been mugged twice at gunpoint. Late at night, out in the streets.
Should we say you used to live in New York?
Yes.
Okay.
And you know what I did? I gave the muggers my wallet.
Yes.
Now, if you said to me, well, wouldn't it have been better if you'd had a gun and had a shootout with the muggers? My answer would be categorically not.
Mm-hmm.
Not just that, but that anybody who says that they would is either incredibly stupid or lying or engaging in a macho display. And so, no, I don't accept the idea that, when the police don't arrive, my only choice is to get into a gunfight with my assailant. I could submit to the assailant. I could give the assailant what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
More likely than not, the assailant who wants my wallet does not want a murder rap.
Right.
But regardless, it's just false to say that those are the only choices. And as far as I'm concerned, I think that giving the wallet not only is the better choice, but I also think that it's a choice that makes sense within the context that we're talking about, and that is social contract was never a guarantee of 100% safety. The social contract, Locke's reasoning is very, very practical. He simply says it's better.
Right.
It's safer.
Right.
Not safest, it's safer. And if you ask me, would I rather be in the state of nature where everybody has guns, or would I rather be in a civil society under a political authority where only the police do, granting that sometimes I'm going to get mugged? The answer is going to be the latter. And that really is the choice Locke is offering us. He's not offering us the choice of Hobbesian state of war against all, or Hobbesian paradise of absolute control and law. He's offering us what strikes me as the much more realistic choice, and that is, a not so miserable state of nature, but still that's bad enough, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And a social contract and civil society that isn't perfect, but is much better, right? That seems to me that that's clearly what we have.
And a couple points.
Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry, I went on too long.
So you gave him your wallet, right? So it's important it's important to note that the story doesn't end there either, because in the civil society, after a crime has taken place, you can go to the police. You can file, which you did, and you can file a report. And a non-trivial amount of the time, you can get your property returned to you. Certainly not all the time.
My friend's stolen car got returned to him.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently there was a group stealing cars, and the police were onto them. And when we reported our car stolen, there was just more evidence, and he got his car back. So yes, you're right.
And that's also a benefit of civil society that you couldn't get if you didn't trust the police. But again, it's a type 1, type 2 error problem. Like, maybe you could have prevented being mugged if you had a gun. Although I agree with the points you made about you're not John Wayne, I'm not either. I wouldn't particularly want to get into a gunfight with the street criminal. But maybe I could prevent a mugging if I had a weapon on me. But there's so that's preventing type 1 error.
I don't want to say I'm not denying.
Yeah.
That people having guns will never result in crimes being thwarted or avoided or whatever. I'm not suggesting that at all. And again, that's an empirical question. I just, I don't know the answer to what the likelihoods are and all of that. I don't think it's really relevant.
Well, I think it decreases the type 1 error, which is I get taken advantage of by a criminal. But then it increases this type 2 error, which now there are all these guns around, right? So if we're permissive of guns in society, I might be able to stop the mugging. But now I'm more likely to get into an accident because of the gun I have, and because we've decided to relax laws against guns, I'm more likely to run into some other gun which was let into society in order to protect me.
It creates a kind of a general, I think, a very general and dangerous social unease. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I'm really very careful about how I interact with people in public. For example, while driving, or in certain situations which can get tense, like people waiting on long lines and all sorts of things, because in this area we have ubiquitous concealed carry. And, when I walk into a Walmart and I see a guy standing there with a pistol, I turn around and walk out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, yes, maybe in some theoretical sense, he might be preventing himself from getting mugged, but he's also now created a scenario where I refuse to share a public space with him.
Mm-hmm.
And because I don't know who he is. The fact that he's got a gun makes me think already that he's probably a conspiratorial nut, because he's probably one of these people that bought into the idea that we're swimming in crime, even though crime rates are the lowest they've been since the 1960s. And in that way, I think that the gun carry types make exactly the same mistake that the rape culture people make on the left, and that is they substitute their own subjective private impressions for actual crime data, right? And just like we're not in a rape culture, if you actually look at crime statistics, all violent crime, including rape, is at a low point since the 1960s. We're also not in a crime-ridden society in which people in Springfield, Missouri, need to walk around with guns. That's not to deny that there aren't very high crime areas in the United States,
right.
But as overall, of all the times when somebody would try to make a safety argument for needing a gun, now is the worst time to make it, because we're the safest we've been in almost 50 years. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I just don't.
Although I'll say that when I saw a guy with 2 pistols and Hillary for Prison t-shirt, I did finish my shopping.
You stayed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. I was with my daughter in a Starbucks, and a guy walked in scrubs with a gun, like just not even a holster, shoved in his waistband, and she and I just turned around and walked right out. Point is, I don't know you, man.
Right.
If I see a policeman with a gun, at least I have a reason to think that he's not some whack job. But I just see some dude walking around, in camos and shit, and he just got out of some gigantic truck. He's got. My instincts are not going to be to stick around, right? I don't know who the hell this guy, and that really is the whole point of the social contract, right? Locke really makes 2 arguments. One, and they're both based on trust. One is the law enforcement argument. We don't trust each other for good reason, sufficiently to enforce the laws in our own case. And the other is economic. We don't trust in each other enough to make the kind of large-scale investments that we could produce an advanced society out of it. In other words, in order to have an advanced economy, you need courts. Right. The only reason somebody's going to give you a Mercedes for nothing but a promise, signature, is because they know that if you don't pay them, they can go to court, and the court will force you to.
Right.
And so I just don't understand why people don't seem to see that the entire logic of our society is based on the idea that we don't trust each other.
Well, let's talk about the logic of these objections then. So a really central idea here is there's risks in sort of the state of nature and the free-for-all, and there's risks in civil society. There's always risks, but we're just saying the risks in civil society are less. And
that's Locke's only argument for it, is that they're less. Yeah. Yeah.
And the risks in going about trying to prevent crime in a social way and in a contractarian way are less than the risks of distributing guns to the citizens. So this is where I do see there's a kind of common logic to all these objections, which is the society at large, the society around the individual, features exclusively as a source of threats. And the only solution that the people making these arguments can envision, seemingly, is an individual one, where each person reverts to being the arbiter of their own safety by holding a gun. And that is a really kind of lonely view of the world. And
hence the Grover Norquist quote. Is that what you're? Yeah, I was going to say, because we're at an hour and a half. So if you're going to get that, the quote is remarkable. So I just wanted to make sure that you got it in, because just when you read it to me, I was like, I can't even believe that this man said this.
Okay, let's end with that then.
What was do you know what the context of the quote is from?
I'm not sure. I believe it was a remark.
He wasn't talking about guns, though, was he?
No. Well, guns are actually a clause in the quote.
Yeah, but was it in response to a shooting discussion, a discussion about shootings, or was it on something else entirely? Or was it just general philosophy of life?
I believe it was something else entirely, and it is sort of. But okay, so this is the quote, and I'll say this briefly in introduction: is I do wish liberals like myself would listen more to what conservatives are telling us about their ideas of politics before moving on to the objecting. We haven't been modeling that today, I guess, because we've been doing most of the objecting, but it's also good to just listen to what their priors are and what their ideas of freedom are. And that's what my article is mostly about. But anyway, Grover Norquist made this statement. My ideal citizen, so this is an ideal of citizenship, which he's presenting us with. My ideal citizen is the self-employed, homeschooling, IRA-owning guy with a concealed carry permit, because that person doesn't need the goddamn government for anything. So
how is that a citizen of any? How is that a citizen?
Indeed. Because his ideal citizen is defined by what he's excluded from, by what he doesn't need from the larger society, right?
How is that not just somebody in the state of nature?
That's a very good question. I mean, he's self-employed. He's not embedded into the economy in the usual way through employment, through being part of a business. He's homeschooling, so he's not part of the educational system. He's IRA owning, again, a certain kind of economic independence, although somebody has to put together the IRA. And he has a concealed carry permit, meaning he doesn't rely on the police in the same way we all do. So it's a completely individualized, atomized, if you want to talk that way, kind of person who's ideal insofar as he's excluded from all these kinds of very basic institutions of civil society, which make up just kind of the basic daily texture of life.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you'd call that an extreme libertarian, right?
Yeah, or even libertarianism is a statist philosophy. This is almost a non-statist philosophy. This is a really extreme kind of in the state of nature. Can I do my other money quote? Do we have time?
Do whatever. Yes, that's fine. Yeah. You have another. Is it another Norquist quote?
No. This happened right after the Las Vegas shooting.
Is this the price of freedom quote?
No.
Okay.
That was Bill O'Reilly, but this is...
Bill O'Reilly, that's right. The Las Vegas massacre is the price of freedom. Right.
Yeah. But so the question we're asking is, do the people who make these really extreme conservative arguments even want a civil society at all? Or do they just want to live in a kind of state of nature? Well, right after the Las Vegas shooting, somebody on Sean Hannity's show suggests that we should live more like gazelles. Where he said...
You mean getting eaten by lions all the time?
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
I'd rather be the lion.
Well, but he basically suggested that we should go through life like a gazelle with our ears twitching, looking around for threats, showing situational awareness, because there's always going to be somebody who could come in and be a threat to us. And he was suggesting that the victims at the Las Vegas shooting should have been more gazelle-like and more aware of potential shooters, I suppose. But he said the gazelles don't show up at the water hole completely clueless, looking at his cell phone. Gazelles looking at cell phones. Completely clueless, looking at his cell phone with no idea where the bad guy's going to come from. And then he said the gazelles know how to act, not just react. They know where the bad guy is coming from. And that's why they're constantly looking, observing, and then if something happens, they react. So this is going so far to say is we should act like animals.
Why do these people always talk like 8-year-olds? Bad guy. Who the fuck talks like that after they're 7 or 8, after they stop playing cops and robbers? I mean, for God's sake, just the language of it strikes me as so infantile and unreflective. But I guess I'm chafing a little bit against calling these people conservatives. Conservatives, more than liberals, believe in public authority, right? And in institutions, right? I mean, a conservative who doesn't believe in institutions, has no faith in institutions, is not, by definition, it seems to me, a conservative. And these all strike me as being, either whack job libertarians, which to me seems to me to be a deformation of liberalism, not anything conservative. I never understood why libertarians were called conservatives.
Right.
Do you want to get that?
Yeah. Here.
Will it stop?
Okay. Just hung up on them.
You actually have a landline still. That's amazing. In other words, this all strikes me as the utterances of radical libertarians, not conservatives. I don't know that it matters so much what we call people, but I can just see some conservatives saying, "Wait a minute, I don't not believe in institutions. I don't not believe in authority. I don't not believe It's just very odd to speak of conservatives who have no belief in authority and no belief in institutions, right? I mean,
well, but these same people, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly, will now on gun control make these seemingly extremely libertarian arguments, and then when it comes to sort of cultural issues, and
then they all of a sudden believe in the institutions again.
Yes, they do. But it's incoherent, but you have to delineate the incoherence, right?
Yeah. I don't know. Because I used to be a conservative, and because I have a tremendous respect for and even affection for the intellectual tradition. I'm a pretty big Michael Oakeshott fan. I'm a pretty big T.S. Eliot fan. You want an obscure one? Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the English Romantic poet, also wrote one of the most important conservative, I don't know, call it manifestos or whatever it's called, on the Constitution of Church and State. I resent saddling conservatives with a lowbrow moron like Sean Hannity. I think it's a slander on the tradition to associate, a scumbag like Bill O'Reilly.
I already
the tradition of Oakeshott and Burke and Eliot and Coleridge, right? I you know what I mean? I don't know. I think that people on our side do this too much. We identify the conservatives with their worst, most ridiculous representatives, rather than their the very venerable tradition that they come from, if indeed they do.
Well, that let me address, because I don't want it to be said that I picked Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity because they were the worst representative. I picked them because they're some of the most popular and influential.
Yeah, fair enough. And Rush Limbaugh, you'd add him.
But I do, following what you said, I would not try to hold Robert George or Roger Scruton responsible for what Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity said. But the one thing that I will say is Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly are capable of sounding like Roger Roger Scruton or Robert George under
certain circumstances on certain issues.
Circumstances.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that part of their brain to get where they come from.
Well, just like Maxine Waters can sound like John Stuart Mill sometimes. I suspect rarely. But you know, she's not someone I would want to, as a liberal, to be saddled with. If somebody was doing a critique. Well, I think we covered the gun thing pretty well, and in terms of the social contract, there's more to talk about. I'm actually now more and more thinking that I really do want to do something on conservatism, but the trouble really is just going to be who the hell I'm going to do it with. And maybe you can help me in that regard. People in the comments have already given me recommendations. The problem is that I just have this constant sticking point, is that I really just don't think too many, if any, of the American thinkers are conservative, but rather liberal or reactionary or libertarian or something like that. But I'll have to think about it some more. Was there anything else you wanted to finish up with before we wrap it?
No, I finished a couple of times, so I think that should be enough.
David Ottlinger, thank you very much. And I look forward to doing whatever we do next. I don't know where we should go next. I feel like we should do something. There's something else historical that we should do. But I mean, we did Kant, we did liberalism. We did a big two-parter. But I feel like there's more in the historical tradition we could mine. So maybe you and I will behind the scenes have to talk about what we might do next.
All right.
All right, my friend.
All right.
All right. Take care. Goodbye. See you all next time.